Now, I've known Builder, we figured it out, probably about 60 years, maybe a little longer. We knew each other as children. We both grew up in Brooklyn in left-wing families. This is the very late 40s, 50s. We went to the same left-wing summer camp, and this is during the whole of the McCarthy period. Those of you who remember who Joseph McCarthy was, and I would say we were imbued with a social consciousness. We were concerned from very early on with issues of racism, with issues that dealt with the poor and the underprivileged and how they functioned within our society. And these are themes which I think you will see in some of Builder's earliest photographs. This is the March on Washington in 1963, and some of his earliest photos were taken in demonstrations during the 60s. We also both went to Brooklyn College, and we studied. Builder was a few years after me, but we studied with Ad Reinhardt, the painter. We studied with Walter Rosenblum, the photographer, and Milton Brown, the historian of American art. So I'm just going to go forward. These are some of Builder's really early photographs taken. I wanted him to put this in for sure because it reminded me so much of what we have seen very recently in Ferguson. Going through these. Okay. So from Brooklyn College, Builder, you had a really strong training in art. And in fact, let's see, I'm losing my notes here.
Well, actually, I was already into art before I got to Brooklyn College, and I was already considering myself an abstract expressionist. Willem de Kooning was one of my heroes, and I think it was my father that took me to museums and galleries, even as a kid and a teenager. And in addition to abstract expressionism, one of the things that influenced me was going with my father to the Museum of Modern Art to see the Family of Man exhibition, which was another very powerful thing. So when I went to Brooklyn College, at first I was going to major in biology after taking the basic beautiful liberal arts and taking a few courses. Then at some point, because I took engineering, physics, and biochemistry together, 2 big 4.5 credit courses, and flunking them together, I decided I'm going to switch over to art, something I had been doing on my own for a long time. And art was going to help me enjoy college and just get through the world like that. And I'm an expressionist, but one of the courses was photography, and it helped me. I kept with photography more than the painting and the sculpture because it was a way I could deal with the real world, be more involved in what was going on in the world around me, in the streets, the demonstrations. It was a way I could live and experience, mediated by the camera and making photographs. And I've been doing that ever since.
So Builder, after a couple of years after you left Brooklyn College, you started working with at-risk teens in Brooklyn, in Bushwick, Bed-Stuy, I think. And why don't you talk a little bit of what you did with the students, and how the photographs that we're going to see now reflect that interaction.
So I graduated Brooklyn College and had to make a living, and I had majored in art. And I spent a month and a half trying to be a commercial photographer because I thought by the time I graduated, I realized I was an abstract expressionist but also a photographer. And after working real hard to photograph somebody's sculptures, I did it the best I could. I made $40, and I had nothing I wanted to exhibit and make it into a book and share with the world of anything that would make a big contribution, even though I made the artist that I was working for happy. And so I became a recreation leader in parks, and then after 6 months of that, I decided I'll become an art teacher, and that was a way to earn a living, and at the same time, I'd be involved in stuff that I was interested in. And one of the things that I found with teaching is that if you can be teaching something you're interested in and you believe in yourself, as well as something you think the students would be interested in, it helps. And that's how I got through 35 years of teaching adolescents, mostly at-risk teens, by making it something I was interested in, and it worked most of the time.
Okay, this is the...
And for 13 of those 35 years, I worked in an alternative program in Bushwick, Brooklyn. It used to be like the South Bronx used to be in the Bronx. Now it's being gentrified.
Right.
So
okay.
Before I even got to... So street photography, art photography, social documentary photography. So those are three aspects of my work that I tried to combine, and you'll see the different aspects. I tried to... If you make a work of art that somebody enjoys looking at, it has some beauty, some richness in it, people will look at it, and then if you have something to say about the people or the whatever your subject is, people can absorb it, can enjoy it. But if it's not beautiful in some way, it's not going to last.
And you got cameras for your students, right?
Well, when I taught in Bushwick, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, a program on the Lower East Side, at different times, I organized photography programs where I got money from school, money from private foundations, so I could have a well-funded photography program. And I would take the students out into the street, in their neighborhoods in particular, but sometimes out, to make photographs. And I would usually try to bring my own camera and make my own photographs as an example for my students, and also encourage them. And sometimes they gave me special entree into their neighborhoods, their families, their friends, their hangouts. And sometimes I gave them some inspiration. And it worked back and forth. It was an amazing thing. And so in this particular photograph, I call it Central Avenue Reflection, it was a pretty tough block. The whole street of Central Avenue was pretty run down and poor, but interesting. Interesting as all heck. And my students and I had gone to a local playground schoolyard, IS 111 schoolyard, and for that afternoon, and we're on our way back, and it was a cold afternoon. You can see snow on reflections across the street on the buildings. And we were running late, and I wanted to get back, bring them back, and go home, because I had to walk to a train station and take a half-hour train ride, 20 minutes. So on the way, they stopped off at this little hangout, snack bar, laundromat, a combination of things. They had seen some people in there they knew, and they wanted to warm up. And at first I was a little upset, but then I said, okay, this is my opportunity to photograph, where I normally was afraid to walk around with my camera by myself, because it was a tough, poor neighborhood. And so this is one of the ways that I could that my students helped me. Let's go to the next picture.
Yeah. Okay, and let's go forward a little bit more. Okay.
This was in Lower East Side, or East Village now. After working 13 years in Bushwick, I transferred closer to home into Manhattan, where I had moved. And these are my students in another program, also where I had photography, and some of the students, some of them had cameras. Let's keep going.
Yeah, some of them have cameras. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So
Actually, I was with my students from Ocean Hill, Brownsville at this time. We went to a trip
yeah. So
to Brownsville.
yeah. Do you all want to sit down? You could just quick.
Let's move into the next picture.
Yeah. Okay. So
I could work.
you want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. You do it.
Which one do I?
Okay. That one. This. That's the one. Okay. So at the same time you were working with your students, you were going out with them, you were working with them with photography, you started the project in Appalachia, right?
Yeah, what happened is I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, like Bernie Sanders. And I photographed up until Brooklyn College Art Department, I treated photography pretty much like everyone else does, for fun, hobby, snapshots, but without any conscious understanding that you could use photography to make a statement about the world, about how you feel about the world, what you see out there that you want to share with other people that you think might be important, to help to make changes of people's consciousness. So after photographing in New York and in Brooklyn from 1962, while I was still a student, up until I graduated in 64, up until about 67, 68, I mainly was doing everything in the streets of Brooklyn and Manhattan and New York City. I went on a few demonstrations to Washington, D.C., and that was about it. But then I decided I want to see America. A famous photographer, Robert Frank, one of the most famous, did a book of his photographs from the mid-50s called The Americans, and he went to most of the states around the country and made his portrait of America. Well, I knew I couldn't do that, and I didn't want to do it the way he did it. I wanted to do something of one significant area that I felt a certain affinity for its fantastic heritage of labor struggle, the fight for workers' rights, miners' rights, and that was Coalfield, Appalachia. And so I wrote to people, and in 1968 I had a few contacts from people, and I started out with contacts, and I ended up making a few photographs. But in 68, somebody wrote, one of my contacts in Coalfield, Appalachia in Kentucky, they wrote back to me, "Don't come down to us, we can't help you, we're being harassed by the police, even the FBI." They were trying to stop strip mining in eastern Kentucky and organizing coal miners and people. And so they said, "Go to North Carolina, the mountains of Boone, North Carolina," which I did. But I had contacts in southern West Virginia, a young Christian organization, a young volunteer to help poor families, and he became a contact for me and introduced me to some people. So on the way back from North Carolina, I stopped off in southern West Virginia and made my first photograph. That photograph, the coal camp, was made 2 years later, when I realized definitely I had to just focus on Coalfield, Appalachia, because of that miner's heritage. And so I wanted to make photographs about the life of the Appalachian coal mine. And I would tell people, I'm a school teacher from New York, and I'm trying to make photographs about the life of the Appalachian coal miner. And I would tell this to anybody in the region that asked me, what am I doing coming down here photographing them? Because a lot of people had done it and were still doing it. And some people had talked about having bad receptions, including I had a cousin and a famous photographer, Ben Fernandez. A lot of people, they didn't get good reception, and my feeling is they probably didn't spend enough time and energy talking to the people and explaining what they were trying to do. I'll mention with this photograph, Mount Olive Baptist Church, I was looking to photograph a white Walker Evans-like church. Walker Evans did a lot of white wooden churches in the South, and I wanted to find a church next to a coal mining preparation plant or tipple. In the back of this church, you can see part of it, a preparation plant. But this church wasn't white wood. It was kind of gritty. You could see the coal dust on the stucco or whatever the stone is. But what caught my eye was the reflection of the light in the Sunday morning light in the windows. And I was telling Dr. Gerson, my friend Paul, I was telling her that they reminded me of Clifford Still abstract expressionist paintings. So I saw these kids hanging around, and I just told them I set up my tripod, a camera on a medium format camera on a tripod, and made the photograph. I asked the kids just to stand still for a few minutes so I can make the photograph. And I'm trying to, I made a book called Appalachia USA. It's like a catalog for the exhibition, and I know it's in the exhibition, and it's available. Okay. I'm trying to, in the book I tell more stories about each of a lot of my photographs and how I work, as well as some of the history and culture that they're reflecting, because I wanted to share it with other photographers and people who say, how do you get these kind of photographs? How can you do it? You're going into a strange place and you're an outsider. But the way I did it anyway is to spend a lot of time and talk to people and try to read up on it.
Okay.
On their history and culture. Yeah. This is one of the earliest mines that I actually got onto the property of and photographed. And I got there by talking to a miner in the streets of East Williamson, waiting for his ride to go to this mine in Kentucky. He'd have to go. He's waiting for a friend to pick him up. They drove. I said, can I follow you in my car while you go to work? And he said, yes. So they even had to slow down on the curvy mountain roads so they wouldn't lose me. And they did that. And so I got to this mine, and as soon as I got there, I started photographing, and no one said, get off our property. So I stayed there. I mean, people made jokes about me.
But you also were talking to
I would be talking. People would be asking me, what are you doing? What do you want? And I would welcome that opportunity to tell them. I'm a school teacher from New York City trying to make photographs about the life of the Appalachian coal miner. And after, I don't know if this was the first day or the second, I would return to the mine several times, morning shift and afternoon shift, with, I had mostly a medium format camera. At the time it was a Hasselblad. And then I also had in the trunk of my car my 5x7 4x5 Deerdorf view camera. It's an old-fashioned looking wooden camera that you have to put a dark cloth over your head. So in this case, I asked these guys waiting for their shift, can I take your picture? And they said, okay. And I set my tripod up, put the camera on, the black cloth, and one guy made a joke about, you're not one of those Nader raiders, are you? Because Ralph Nader had been doing a lot of investigating about all kinds of things in industry around the country before he ran for president. But anyway, so I made the photograph, and while I was setting up and getting ready, one of the old-time said to me, a miner's life is a dog's life. Buddy, put that in your book.
I think we're going through this.
Yeah. Oh, it's going too fast.
Okay.
I didn't mean to. Oh, I can't go back.
Oh, wait. We can go back. Can you go back?
Well, it's gone by itself. I must have. That's what's happening. Well.
Okay. We'll go back.
Well, that's way back.
No. Okay. We need to go forward.
Okay.
Okay. I think
I'm
one
going
more.
to keep going.
Yeah. There you go.
This
Okay.
is the first underground mine photograph that I made, in that same mine where the mine is, life is a dog's life. 1970. And I didn't even have my own flash. When I'd been on that property photographing shift changes, men getting ready to go into the mine, or they just came out. This guy, one of the foremen, he was a safety foreman. He's originally from New Jersey, down here in Kentucky. He said to me, "How would you like to go inside the mine and photograph what it's really like inside?" Of course, that was what I wanted to do. But I never thought, at that time, I didn't think I'd be able to do it, because I had asked some other people and it didn't work. So I said, yes, I would love to, but I don't have the lights. He said, just get a pair of hard-toed boots in town, in Williamson, and we'll provide the light. And so we're inside on a Saturday. They take me in, which is maybe, well, they usually work Monday through Friday, but they work Saturdays too. And I see this miner walking past, and I say, "Can I take your picture?" He says, "Okay." And I ask him, "What are you doing?" He says, he's on lunch break. And so the safety foreman, and also accompanied by the electrician, the chief electrician, they had brought 5 300-watt light bulbs in series on a wire, on a line, electric wire cable, and they, with screwdrivers, jacked it into the high power line, a DC current that powers the mine. And they held it up while I made this man's portrait. Well, but I was a novice in a way. I was a little nervous. Just very excited. And I didn't ask him his name and write it down. And I forgot about his name. I lost touch with him. 33 years later, I came back to the coal field because I got commissioned to come back. And in 2003, I went back to a place in Chattaroy, West Virginia, southern West Virginia, where I had rented a room for 2 consecutive summers in the home of a retired miner and his wife and granddaughter. And so I went back to that little school street, little dirt road community, and didn't find, well, the people I had stayed with, they all had passed away, including the young daughter. But I found some of the other people in that little community, and one of them was Thomas Allen, and he was a black miner, and he had retired and was older by then. And he told, when I showed him my photographs, by then I had a book and I had a portfolio published, and I showed him, and I gave him maybe the portfolio and showed him the book. And he said, I know this man, that's Toby Moore. We worked together in the same mine for many years. We were good friends. In fact, it was Toby Moore that convinced me, Thomas Allen told me, to retire while I still could enjoy life. And so he did. And Thomas Allen passed away. I've lost touch with Thomas Allen for my book. He had told me, his daughter said, give him credit in my book, and I did. But I have no address to send it to at this point. One day, hopefully, they'll get in touch with me. But Toby Moore had passed away, but Thomas Allen gave me his name as Toby Moore. And this is Andrew Costo. There's a big story about him, but just that he passed away at the mine. He was killed at a mine a few years after I made this. And he worked outside. He didn't even work inside. A lot of times a miner that's worked with a company for a long time and he gets older, if they can, they'll put him on an outside job. His job was the loading tipple. And that's where they'll load the coal onto coal trucks or coal cars of trains. And one day he was, after I had made the photograph, he was inspecting underneath the tipple to find out why there was an obstruction and it wasn't working right, and a big piece of slate, probably a few tons heavy, fell on his head and killed him. Nimrod Workman was important to my life in the coal fields because in 1970 I ran into him first I met him in Del Barton, in Mingo County, and he was a group of miners and retired miners were hanging around chatting. He had been active in a lot of the struggles, going back to some of the struggles in the 1920s and the Battle of Blair Mountain. And he also was in, but I asked him, do you know, after chatting with him, I said, do you know, can I rent a room in your house? And he said, no, because I have too many family people coming and going and visiting, but I can ask my friend George Johnson. And he did, and George Johnson said, okay. So in the summers of 71 and 72, my wife-to-be and I stayed with the Johnson family for 2 consecutive summers, and that really gave me a base of operation to work. So one of the things that inspired me to, as I mentioned in the beginning about Appalachia, is their tremendous history of struggles for workers' rights, for miners' rights. And they pioneered in that field of workers' rights. First of all, they were, the Union, United Mine Workers, was founded in 1890 or 1891, and among other things, their constitution had a clause about no discrimination, racial discrimination allowed in the Union. And one of their best organizers was a black miner named Davis, who actually went throughout the country organizing mine workers, including into their Alabama coal fields. But this is in the strike, both this one and the last preceding photograph were the strikes for Brookside High Splint strikes that lasted 13 months, and it was about the coal miners union, the United Mine Workers, had been corrupt and led by a corrupt leader named Tony Boyle from the 50s on throughout the 60s, and wasn't fighting for the rights of miners. And so when their rank and file organized a democratic takeover of the union and elected a more progressive leadership, they immediately went back to Harlan County to try to organize the union. The union had been prevented from organizing in the bloody fights in the 1930s, but they had struggled to try to do it, and then they came back and tried in the 1970s. And it was a 13-month strike. They won the strike, but shortly after that, one company went bankrupt, and another company changed ownership, and so the union is weak, still weak in Kentucky. And in the 80s and then in the 90s, the unions were, there was like a full court press to destroy the unions in West Virginia and in Kentucky, and there's very few union mines left. So Barbara Koppel, the filmmaker, made a film called Harlan County, USA. It was an award-winning documentary, and I met her while I was making this photograph, and in Harlan County. This is important because this was a general store window, but it had been in the same building a company store. And in the days of before World War II in particular, the coal mining, the houses were owned by the coal companies in the coal communities. The stores were owned by the coal companies, and the companies paid the miners not in cash but in scrip. So they had to buy and shop in the company store. And that's where you get the song, lift 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. You could borrow on your debt. You could owe the company store, but the only thing is you were not allowed to leave until you paid off your debt. So it was a form of serfdom.
Okay, we went forward.
Did I miss? Oh,
That's okay. You want to go back? Yeah.
no,
there you
we'll
go.
move on.
Okay. Okay.
Charlie Blevins' collection in his little road stop, and Charlie Blevins had been a miner and then built this little road stop for miners and others on Route 52 in Mingo County. Then I revisited him in 2004, and he's passed away a few months after I visited him. And his daughter helped me get more of his background story, which I put in my book, Appalachia USA, because his family goes back to the days of the struggles in Mingo County, the Union struggles, where the movie Matewan was made, and about the same things.
You need to speak a little louder. Okay. So these were
If you can't hear me, please raise your hand so I'll speak a little louder. This is Donna Muncie, the family which the Christian volunteer helped introduce me to back in 1968. But then I came back, they invited me to come back, and so when I was making a trip throughout Appalachia during Easter week, my school vacation time, it was a wintry Easter, and stopped off, among other places, at the Muncie family in Crum, West Virginia, in Wayne County. And so they moved one kid out of the bed, and I don't know whose, and they put me and my colleague who was traveling with me in that bed, and the next morning I got up early and saw Donna Muncie in the kitchen, washing up. And Donna Muncie visited me for some exhibition in 2006 in New York City with a few people. She was in her mid-40s, married. Her son worked on a coal mine tipple at the time. And I'm still in touch with her and one of her sisters, Patsy Dowell, and who was a teacher and a guidance counselor. Oglesby bedroom is important because I wanted to finish up. I needed more photographs of the lives of the people in their homes. And I was photographing, I went to Stotesbury, Raleigh County, West Virginia. A friend of mine who had become a journalist for the Charleston Gazette gave me a little tour and said I should photograph there. It was and so I was photographing, and some family came by and said, "What are you doing?" This was Memorial Day weekend on a Sunday morning, and I said, "I'm trying to make photographs about the life of the Appalachian coal miner." And they said, "Well, you should photograph Luther Oglesby. He's just around the bend. He's a coal miner." Stopped by. Well, by the time I got there, he's waiting outside his door and said, who are you? What do you want? And I gave told him the same story. And he said, "Come on in." And he sat me down at a big dining room table. He had family visiting for the weekend, and grown children and a grandchild or two. And he offered me home brew, which I don't drink, but it was a hot day that day, and I had been out photographing, so it was very thirst quenching, and I didn't get high or anything. And so we sat and talked for an hour with his oldest son there, and he told me, I asked him a question about his life as a miner, and he told me, and the story's in my book. But the thing is that when we're finished talking, after a while, he says, "Okay, what would you like to photograph?" So I said, "Well, I'm not exactly sure, but I had ideas of different things." But I said, "Let's see." And so he starts walking me around his house. I got my camera and tripod. First stop I see is the kitchen. Fantastic homemade biscuits and a big pot of green beans. And I make a photograph that's in my first book, which is also on the table in the gallery of the museum show. It's called Images of Appalachian Coalfields, but it's not a great. And then we keep going, and all of a sudden we stop at the door of this room, and I see the antique mirror, the old wallpaper, the little light dangling, the antique bed in the mirror, and little crayons, and all kinds of things. And it tells a story, and it just resonates with me. And it goes back to Walker Evans type photographs, his photographs in sharecroppers' homes and in miners' homes, and Atget in Paris, turn of the century, of interiors, mostly of bourgeois homes, but all kinds of things. And so I said, yes, I want to photograph here. fine. Take time, set up my tripod, my medium format Pentax 6x7 on the tripod. I'm using roll film 220 Tri-X Professional. And I get it all framed and it's beautiful, and I'm just using the natural light coming in from the side, a window on the side. That light bulb is giving me a little light, but not enough. And so I'm going to shoot at a slow speed, like a quarter of a second or something, or maybe. But I feel it's missing something. It's a little too quiet. It's beautiful but quiet. And so all of a sudden, one of the Oglesby daughters walks in, and she didn't mean to interrupt me, but she just was looking for what's going on. And I said, and she's about to leave, and I said, no, stay there. This does it. This light does just what I need. And so I say, I'm going to count to 3 and hold your breath, and we make the photograph. There's stories about a lot of these photographs. I put them in my book. Lucius Thompson and his granddaughters, it's important to me because it was after, in 1989, I made a book, Images of Appalachian Coalfields, and organized a traveling exhibition throughout Appalachia and into Florida, Daytona, and then Baltimore, and back to New York City. And it was a show of 52 photographs and a book of 93. And I didn't know, I thought I was finished, but then the problems of mountaintop removal that were big were starting to dominate the coal fields in the 90s. It started earlier in the 80s and even earlier, but in the 90s, this kind of mining where you get rid of all the trees on the top, clear cut the trees, then using blasting powder, you blast off the tops of the mountain, the top rock of the mountains, and then you bring in fantastic big drag lines to scoop out the coal right from the top of underneath the surface. And all the rubble and waste is just bulldozed over the mountain, and it's called valley fill. And what it does is it clogs up the valleys and the streams, and it's bringing heavy metals and the coal rock and all the waste, polluting what water it hits and destroying the streams that lead into the rivers. And it's bad, and people have been complaining about it for years. And it's destroying community life as was known in Appalachia, where generations had lived. People's whole towns are destroyed. And the company also tries to buy out. Mountaintop removal mining companies will try to buy out local villages and towns so that they don't have to worry about people complaining or being sued. So Lucius Thompson was one of my earlier photographs. When I returned, I got a big commission from Appalachian College Association to come back and photograph. We like what you do, and we want to have some of your photographs to show there's a need for funding for education. And we know you'll do that. Another big problem that was becoming dominant in the region was slurry and the coal refuse slurry impoundments, or big artificial lakes of liquid coal waste coming out of the preparation plants where they wash the coal with water and organic chemicals that are cancer-causing and just highly toxic. And so they needed a place to put that water, and that wastewater full of the toxins. And one of the ways they do it is they dam up mountains with summer coal waste and make artificial dams and artificial lakes and pump the liquid waste to those slurry impoundments. And, can we go back? We got to go back a couple. Back?
Yeah.
One more back. Okay, just in 1972, a big coal waste dam broke, and 125 people were killed, and more than 1,000 left homeless in Buffalo Creek in Logan County, West Virginia, from after a big rainstorm. So they're very dangerous. A lot of times they leak a little bit and just pollute a little bit, but they could cause big spills. And
they became much more common.
They became more common and bigger after that. And of course the companies say it was just an act of God when they do break. And this is above this school on the bottom. There's a school. See, in order to show these things, I had to be taken up in an airplane and do aerial photography, and that's what I started to do as part of my adding to the project in the new millennium, because I knew that I had to show this. This was all new development. So there's a school here down at the bottom, and above you see preparation plant and coal storage silos, and it was about 300 yards from the school, and they were complaining kids were getting sick from the coal dust, lung disease or whatever. So it wasn't, though, the school wasn't moved, and above there was a big slurry impoundment above on the mountain above, which if it breaks would just flood that school. It wasn't until miners were killed in 2010 that Massey Energy Company, the big coal company led by Don Blankenship, who's now under indictment and should serve some jail time, which 29 miners were killed because of their violations of all the safety rules in order to make more profits and less worry and not waste any money with worrying about some of the safety laws that they have to observe to protect people. So Don Blankenship did contribute, or I mean his company did contribute at least $1 million or $2 million, and the state of West Virginia contributed $1 million to build a new school 5 miles up the road away from the coal company. So it was a small victory after a lot of environmental activists and social activists against mountaintop removal kept demonstrating. They were demonstrating for more than 10 years before that happened.
Okay, so you want me to just, okay, so also in the 90s, 92 and 1997, you started on some new projects. You developed much more of a global interest, and some of that, I think you've told me, was due to Paul Strand and what Paul Strand had been doing. So why don't you take it from there?
First of all, everything I did, everything I've done and did, most of it that you're seeing today is all related. So the coal miners are a global force, wherever they are, from the Ukraine to Colombia, China, you name it, wherever there was coal and Britain. Coal miners are, the workers of the world unite. That explains it through coal miners. And coal miners have a brotherhood throughout the world. So right away, as soon as when I was going to Appalachia and when I took those pictures, I knew that I was relating to all coal miners and workers in general. And coal miners organized the United Steelworkers Union, the Coal Miners Union, and they organized the United Auto Workers Union. So they play a special role in the workers' fight for workers' rights and union justice. So anyway, but I was interested in getting to see the world. And I had seen a music and dance festival at Lincoln Center from the old Soviet Union, the Musem dance and music and dance group. And I had seen a group as part of that, they had a native Siberian group doing music and dance performance. I said, wow, that looks like Native Americans. And that's fascinating. I would like to go to Siberia. So I started making explorations and talking to people about it. And all I got back was, we can't help you now. One guy finally got in touch with me a couple of years later and said, we can't get you to Siberia, but maybe you'd be interested in Mongolia. I have some friends at the United Nations. And so I said, yeah. I looked up Mongolia, and I see they go back 10,000 years to the days before Genghis Khan. They were nomadic herders, many different tribes of nomadic herders on the Central Asian steppe. And in fact, at times, though, they would raid China, a more agricultural society, for produce or whatever. But basically, they were herding people and nomadic. And the horse was one of their most prized possessions, and herding horses, because they used horses to herd the other animals, and for transportation and warfare, whatever. And now they have a Nadam celebration where they have children's horse races, and this boy was preparing for that. So I said, yes, I'm interested in Mongolia. And after finding out a little about them, because they have a fantastic heritage and culture. And by the way, they were the first Asian country to go socialist. They were helped by the Soviet Union, by Lenin and those people in, I think, 1921, getting independence from the Manchu dynasty, 300 years of rule in China. And then in 1925, they officially became socialist. And in 1990, they had their quiet revolution and became multi-party and a diverse economy. So this mural in their main library in Ulaanbaatar, in the socialist realist style, you can see that they prize. It tells about their history and their struggle of the 20th century. I can't tell if it's in focus or not. And one of so Mongolia, going back before Buddhism, they had shamanist religion, and then they were the ones that propagated the Tibetan Buddhist religion, and and under the Khans, first Genghis Khan and then later Genghis Khan, and then later Kublai Khan. Okay. And I think it was Kublai Khan that really got into the religion in China. They were rulers of the largest landmass empire in the world ever, was controlled by the Khans. At one point, they went all the way up into Hungary and down to Iran. So the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist deities, the more horrific and terrible they seem to be, the more they could protect you from evil. So I made 2 big trips in the 90s. 92 for 27 days with my wife. We finally got invited, and all the arrangements could finally be made in the 90s. It took that long before we could even get to Mongolia for political openings, I guess. And then something I wanted to do ever since the Cuban Revolution of 1959 was go to Cuba. But by the time I got a chance to really go, I got invited to go with Susan Meiselas and some other photographers, but I was teaching, and I would have had to take off from teaching, and I was afraid I'd lose my job, and I didn't know about the political consequences, so I didn't go then. But in 2004, I had already retired from teaching, and my wife had become a birder and was going on a birding tour with the Sarasota Audubon Society. And so while I went with her, and while they were looking at birds, I was walking around photographing in Havana, and this is in a small town called Vinales. And my dream came true to go to Cuba. When I got my Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship to continue on the Appalachian work, which I had already started and almost finished. Let me just see. Well, when I got my Guggenheim in 2008, I had been making trips since 2002 back to Appalachia because of different grants and commissions. And first, I had already had a trip planned to Mexico with my wife. I was a birder and did that. But then I started all these trips back to Appalachia, because when you get a grant, you feel more motivated and more pressured, more obligated to do the work that you got the grant for. And it's something I wanted to finish up. And so with all those grants, I felt obligated and wanted to make the book and finish the project. But I was also doing trips with my wife. Once I retired, around the time I retired in 2000, that's around the time she became a birder. And a birder, she studies the birds, and in New York City goes to Central Park a lot, but also plans trips outside the city and outside the country. And I get to see the world that way. And so one of the trips was to India, northern India, north into the foothills of the Himalayas and around. We did a couple of tourist things, but it was spectacular, and people everywhere, wherever you go. And then another trip was to Tanzania, and where they had migrating animals, were migrating wildebeest and zebras and a few others in the Rift Valley. But one place we stayed in Tanzania was the animals didn't migrate. It was one of the few places, the Ngorongoro crater, and it's spectacular. I guess it had been a volcano at one time and left this gigantic, huge area that had been populated by wild animals, including no elephants. Well, maybe elephants, but I remember lions came up to you're not allowed to get off the road, our vehicle, and coming right up to and I photographed them, and I made this photograph.
Good. Okay, I think those are all we had.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
But then if people have questions,
yeah.
I could fill in some of the stuff we left out.
Right. So also, Builder has 3 books. 2 of them are available, and if you go to the museum, Alice can there's some out in the exhibit, but you can also purchase his books. So speak to Alice about that. Okay. And
yes. One other thing about the books, I noticed they had my book, Images of Appalachian Coalfields, my first book, Temple University Press, is officially out of print. I only own about 7 left, and so they're online, get Amazon. And then the museum has 2 books. One is Builder Levy Photographer, that has a lot of the photographs we showed today. And then the newest book, Appalachia USA, has all the photographs that are in the exhibition, plus quite a few more. And it's in the newest book where I tell most of the stories about the photographs, including a lot I couldn't tell you today.
Okay. Questions, Builder. People may have questions.
Oh, the guy in the back, and then this lady.
Have you ever considered doing color photography at all?
Well, I used to do color slide photography a long time ago. Really mainly before I were able to use photography the way I show you here, as an expressive art form to talk about how I feel inside and to relate to the world and what I see that I want to share. And I do have some color slides. I saved some of then I was doing color slide photography of a few demonstrations and life, but most of them, I stopped doing it back in the late 60s or very early, around 70.
And do you spend a lot of time in the dark room?
I used to spend hours and hours and hours and days and trying to make, and going crazy. And my hands are falling apart. And now, ever since the Guggenheim in particular, I hire some of the best printers that I know of in the world, basically, to help me. And I tell them what I want, and tell them what I want, and sometimes they get it, and then we go back and I pay them to do it over again. And some of these best printers are better than I am in a way. They can do what I want. And so I'm also working with a platinum printer. Some of the prints in the exhibition are platinum prints, and that's a more complex process. It's a contact print process, so you have to make, nowadays you can use digital technology or negative the size that you want the print to be. And so I work with people to do that, and that's even harder than working with a silver printer, because it's even more people you have to go to get what you want. That's the short answer. What did you want to ask?
I was interested about your writing. I haven't looked at your books yet, but you said that when you visit the people or you talk to them, what's your process? Like, do you take notes? Do you record what they say? Or are you like a oral historian in that way?
You know, this is so exciting for me. The whole thing, my whole life is being summed up here, and when I look at the exhibition, the beautiful exhibition downstairs, and that Alice Palladino Craig directed. I want to thank you for that, and this college. And so first I was a teacher for 35 years, and my last 11 years I was working in a job training program for high school dropouts, people who had been in prison or jail, or youngsters who had been in foster homes and had a rough life. And so it was age 17 to 21. It was sort of the oldest group that I had worked with all these years. Also Board of Ed teacher. And I became the resource room teacher, and I focused on the writing. My main interest and work was getting the students to write. They had to meet state requirements in writing. So I developed something to survive and to do what I liked. I got them to talk about and then write about their lives. And they had to edit it a few times to show that they learned how to do it properly. And we made writing magazines each term. It was twice a year I would have a writing magazine from a group, and they would write about their lives, and they had the most amazing lives. I mean, I also taught basic reading and writing, and I had students reading Richard Wright's Black Boy, which is a very powerful novel, and I had them reading Down These Mean Streets by Piri Thomas, who was a Puerto Rican growing up in Spanish Harlem, and other great things, Gwendolyn Brooks, We Real Cool, We Left School, We Sing Sin, We Thin Gin, We Jazz June, We Die Soon. I mean, it's about my students' lives. So things like that, I could get to my students and get to them to open up and talk about their lives and then write about it. And they would be completing the requirements for the program they were in. And at the same time, everyone loved making these magazines. And they and I, we would put in as much time as we needed and more to get them done. And so I would write introduction to those magazines. And then when I started making my second book, Builder Levy Photographer, I had to write a preface for it. And I also, artists have to write artist statements all the time. So yes, I became a writer, actually. And with the Appalachia, and then for the new book, I felt more of a writer because I had already done all this. And so I wrote more. And also, I wanted the stories tell how I worked and about the lives of the people. And I wanted to convey that to a general audience, and in particular to photographers who want to do this kind of stuff also. Because there's no real shortcuts. You have to do it. Put in the time. But there was something else that,
So you have another question back there?
We'll get back. It's a big story. Did I answer it a little bit?
No, I wanted to know the process. Like when you interview, when you visit the homes and things like that.
What I do now is, when I go photographing, I try to take people's names, location, date, what they do, get basic factual information so I could come back later and put it on like I did today. And the contact, so I can contact them. And a lot of these, I contacted a lot of people, anybody I could, to get more information from them later after I made the photographs. But when I first started out, I had also been inspired by Walker Evans and James Agee, their famous book called And Now We Praise Famous Men, and now let us praise famous men. And that was like a diary of their trip to Alabama sharecroppers family, and they live with them, and it gets all psychological, emotional, and psychosexual and everything. But it was a diary of their work, mostly of James Agee, the writer. I knew I wasn't a writer, but on my first trips to Appalachia, I had my notebook, and I was trying to be like that, keep a diary and note. Later on, there were times when I didn't keep as many notes or do it as well. And now I know I keep little, well, I used to have a little notebook that I could put in my pocket or back, anything. And I would get as much as I can, but sometimes I would fail, but most of the time, did I answer it now?
Yes.
Yeah.
At the time you were making your work, did you consider it political? Was that an important part of it?
Wait, could you speak a little louder?
At the time you were making these photographs, did you consider yourself being political?
Political?
Yes.
I was political way before I started this kind of stuff. So it was just like an extension of my life. And it made my political stuff more meaningful, because I tried to organize students. I did help organize, like my brother went to Lafayette High School, and so in 1964, in 1960 there was Woolworth's boycotts to support the Southern students boycotting restaurants in Woolworth to protest segregation and all that. So
Now, also, how do you see your work in context of the Black Lives Movement?
I haven't been photographing that. I tried a little bit, but I stopped photographing. You mean the Black Lives Matters movement?
Yes.
Well, there was a big demonstration in New York City on that theme a few years ago, around in December, beginning of December, and I tried photographing it, but I didn't do so great. And then there was a big environmental demonstration in New York City just about 3 months before that, and I did some. I haven't been doing that much lately, but that's a great thing to photograph. I just haven't been doing it, and I've slowed down in terms of the demonstration stuff. What happened is, in the turn of the new millennium, I thought I'd go back to photographing demonstrations. I got a small grant, and I did a lot in the streets from 2000 to 2001, and a little bit more. And I have a few good photographs, but I don't feel I got enough to. I don't feel I'm the same. I'm able to get great photographs in that anymore. I think Black Lives Matter is a whole. There's so much going on, and I'm hoping some photographers get into that.
Okay,
I think it's for a younger person.
You have Builder, you have a question?
Oh.
Some other questions?
You take the questions.
I can't.
There
Yes.
were a few people had hands up.
Yeah, you have a number of
this guy,
people left. Yeah.
This lady and then this gentleman. Sorry.
Okay.
So to try to kind of expand on that Black Lives Matter, so something I kind of found when I was doing photography and stuff is that I always was a little shy. And has anyone ever said to you that your work was exploitative at any point or anything? Not because I think it is, but because coming as an outsider and coming into those communities and trying to take photographs, did you ever feel like you were kind of treading on, I don't know, scary territory?
Okay, this is great, because that was with could have been with Appalachia. It could be in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Fort Greene, Brownsville, all Bushwick, all the places I worked, Lower East Side, even anywhere, and that's why before you start putting your camera in people's faces, especially in like a community or a neighborhood, that where you're an obvious outsider, you have to first talk to people. One of the things I do is try to make contacts with people first. It could be, so that's one thing. That's the main thing.
Okay, you have another question?
Wait, we promised this gentleman. And he's getting,
Okay.
oh, I can't go home if I don't.
So just carrying off of the question about Black Lives Matter, and you mentioned that you believe it's something for maybe a younger photographer. Are there any up-and-coming photographers dealing with political subjects that you're looking at? You're looking at their work now?
Well, actually, even though I said younger photographer, it's just that the demonstrations I didn't do that good with it. I don't really think age is the key. So the photographers that I admire, one of the photographers that I admire most in the world today is Sebastian Salgado. He's world famous. He's a Brazilian, but he's based in Paris. And his latest project was Genesis, photographing all the important environmental places of the world that could be threatened by global warming and man's exploitation of man, like in the Amazon and in the North Pole, South Pole, and Africa, and all kinds of things. So Salgado's one, and I'm finding new people all the time. The younger people, I'm really not that up on that many good ones. A few years ago, someone from Appalachia, a photography teacher, introduced me online to some young photographer student of his, and she did beautiful work, but then she graduated and then she's a poet basically or something, and she moved into a different direction outside of photography. Oh, there was another.
Yeah, I was curious, have you ever transitioned to using any digital equipment, digital cameras? That was the first part of the question.
I'm getting ready to.
Yeah.
I think I think I'm going to do it next week.
Yeah.
I've been saying this for the last year. I have to switch to digital. I have too much trouble with the film and the camera. In fact, it was with Black Lives Matter's demonstration where my camera jammed. I had problems, and so I didn't get the photographs I was going to get. So that's what happened then.
The last part of my question was, you talked about how you wanted to do photography, wanted to tell a story about specific people, also express yourself. What do you feel like you've learned the most about yourself from a lot of the projects that you've worked on?
Wow, it never stops, it never ends, and there's no, it's, first of all, I'm trying to find out why I'm able to get good photographs. I know that this is my way of, it helped me relate to people and to the world and to all the things I'm photographing. I wanted to be involved. This is my way I was able to be more involved. Like Bernie Sanders, look, he's involved in his way. And this is my way. I go to therapy to find out about myself. And I don't always understand all the things with the photography. But one interesting thing is that I find photographs that I made a while back that I like more now than I did then. And it goes the other way too. And I'm just always, because of all this work, I'm talking to you and others, and I'm trying to write more about the photographs. I have to keep looking back. I look back on my life, and then I met Paula, who I knew when I was a kid, and she was a teenager already, and we didn't talk much in camp because it was different. And I looked at her almost as an adult, and now, we're talking back about those old days to try to find out more. Constantly learning new things about my life and the world and what's going on. There was someone else I pointed to.
Were there any times where you felt physically at risk in some of these situations?
There were a few times in New York, in Appalachia, a few times where I had done things that weren't quite so smart, and so I was at risk. But truth of the matter is I never got physically really hurt. I lost 2 cameras over the years from people taking them from me. You know, directly taking them from you. That's scary. But, I mean, you know, like one time, it's not that I did something wrong, but I wasn't smart. Like, I was on a block, and you didn't see the photograph from this, photographing a neighborhood cleanup in a poor block in Bedford-Stuyvesant. We had organized it with the Brooklyn College NAACP and local branch NAACP, and I was a photographer photographing it. And I got some good photographs, and then I walked, they were finished, the cleanup, I walked down the block and photographed the family, and then I got a great photograph of an old lady who had just come back from somewhere with her shopping bag and sat down on her stoop right next to where I was. Great shot, and it was candid. And the junkies that had been hanging out, junkies and winos, where we did the neighborhood cleanup up the block, they didn't let me take pictures of them in the beginning. They were right not to. Shouldn't have bothered with them. But coming home, all the other people from the cleanup were gone. And everyone went in, and I just walked. I should have walked down the other end of the block. Or when the guy said, now you can take our picture, I should have just kept walking fast. But I didn't. So that's a matter of stupidity, and so the rest is history. And then another time I was with my students in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, and we all had our cameras and photographing in a very, very poor area. And some junkies came up and wanted to start showing us the rat holes where and we should have, if I had been a little smarter, said, no, we're gone, guys, let's go. And then everything would have been cool. But I stopped and let him show us the rat holes. And that was it. Took my student's camera, took my camera. So no one got hurt in that. No one got hurt anywhere, but it's scary. It takes you a few days. But you grow up and you get street smart and you know how to deal with people better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Everybody go see the exhibit if you haven't already.
Oh, if you buy the book, you can get or if you join the museum, you get a book free. I think that's the deal.
Thank you.
See Alice Palladino Craig about that.
Great.
I saw your photography commission be open tonight.
Oh, great.
I love it. I'm a documentary photographer myself. Yeah, so I'm on the